Since the initial creation of the National Basketball Association, there have been several different dynasties who have shaped the history and landscape of the sport. Of course, within those dynasties have been iconic superstar figures who get the vast majority of the attention. But with that being said, usually those players were such gigantic figures that they cast a massive shadow over the key contributors of their success. Today, we're looking at an unsung hero from each dynasty in chronological order, as we aim to appreciate these all-time great teams with a broader perspective. Before I get started, let me first explain the definition of a dynasty for this video. In this case, a dynasty is a team that won at least 3 championships in the span of a decade with the same core group of players. So without further ado, let's get into it. First off, Vern Mikkelsen of the 1950s Lakers. The superstar of that Lakers team was the 6'10 George Mikan, and honestly, I can even argue that he's underappreciated based on how much he dominated and based on how rarely his era is discussed. Regardless, most of you have heard of George Mikan, but I guarantee that only a few of you have ever heard of his sidekick, Vern Mikkelsen. Mikkelsen was a 6'7 power forward who had a lethal hook shot, years before Kareem ever set foot in the NBA. He was one of those guys with that old school mindset that whenever possible, you show up to work. And as a result, in his 10-year career, he missed a grand total of just 5 regular season games. If the best ability is availability, then Mikkelsen was truly one of the very best. He was usually the team's second best scorer and rebounder behind Mikan. He won 5 NBA championships and was a 6-time All-Star. At his peak in 1955, he was averaging over 18 points and 10 rebounds on 42% shooting, which was actually elite efficiency during the NBA's infancy. In a league that had many successful Robins, Mikkelsen was probably the first Robin in the history of NBA dynasties. Sam Jones of the 1960 Celtics. Bill Russell was the legendary leader of the most dominant team in basketball history, which was the Celtics of the 60s. The thing is, Russell had the luxury of being able to focus almost exclusively on his defense and rebounding, while others carried the load of the team's offense. No one shouldered more of that offensive burden than his 6'4 shooting guard, Sam Jones. Sam had a game that was incredibly ahead of its time, as he had a good handle of the basketball and a smooth pull-up jumper. Not only was he often the leading scorer in the regular season, but he usually took his offensive game to another level in the playoffs. For example, in 1965, he averaged close to 30 points per game over the entirety of the postseason. He had 4 playoff games in his career where he dropped at least 40 points, including an efficient 51-point performance in 1967 against the New York Knicks, which was a series-clinching victory. Over his career, he was a 5-time All-Star and won a ridiculous 10 championship rings in his 12 seasons in the NBA. Make no mistake, Bill Russell was the greatest player on that dynastic squad, but let's be honest, he often gets all of the credit when a significant portion of that belongs to his sharpshooting teammate. Michael Cooper of the 1980s Lakers. Players like Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and James Worthy are the most famous faces of the Showtime Lakers. But they don't win 5 championships in that decade without their best defensive player, the 6'7 shooting guard Michael Cooper. Cooper was one of the first 3-and-D type of players, and he's one of the very best in both of those aspects. For a while, he was the NBA record holder for the most 3-pointers made in a finals game. You'd be wrong if you assumed that he was just a shooter though, as he was freakishly athletic and was often the recipient of Magic Johnson's alley-oop passes. Defensively, he made a total of 8 all-defense teams, which is the second most in franchise history behind only Kobe Bryant. And in 1987, he was named the NBA's Defensive Player of the Year, even though he was coming off the bench. Maybe the greatest piece of evidence of his all-time great defense is the fact that Larry Bird once referred to Cooper as the greatest defensive player that he's ever faced. He was a part of all 5 championship teams, and although he was never considered as a superstar, I certainly consider him as one of the greatest 6 men of all time. Dennis Johnson of the 1980s Celtics. When it comes to these great Celtics teams, players like Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish seem to draw all of the attention, and even guys like Bill Walton and Danny Ainge get some of the shine as well. But the fantastic player that I almost never see mentioned in the documentaries or in the TV specials was the Celtics starting point guard / shooting guard. Unlike Michael Cooper, DJ was not a great three-point shooter, but he was a massive help to the Celtics on both ends of the court. Prior to his days in Boston, DJ spent time as a leading star player and was even the Finals MVP for the Seattle Supersonics in 1979. When he became a Celtic, less was required of him, but he still remained as a key scorer and distributor, as he averaged nearly 15 points and nearly 6 assists in his first 3 seasons in Boston. The best part of his game, though, was his elite on-ball defense, as he was regularly assigned to the best scoring wings in the entire league, like Michael Jordan, for example. On the defensive end, there are very few who are more proven, as DJ made and earned a total of 9 All-Defense Team selections, which is tied for the second most selections for a guard in NBA history. Overall, he was a 3-time NBA champion and a 5-time All-Star. Ron Harper of the 1990s Bulls. He was only there for the second three-peat, but his impact for that team should not be downplayed. Many people lose track of just how stacked those late 90s Bulls were. Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman created all of the headlines, and even Tony Kukoc earned the respect of the basketball world. But what's rarely mentioned is just how impactful Harper was, and how he was a legitimate star in his own right before joining Chicago. In his first 8 years in the league, Harper was averaging around 20 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2 steals, while being a pretty solid defensive player. Once in Chicago, he remained a full-time starter, but didn't have to score as much with teammates like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, as his scoring dropped to roughly 8 points per game. On the other hand, Harper usually doesn't get enough credit for his contribution to their all-time great perimeter defense. He was fantastic at frustrating opposing guards and forcing them into making bad decisions. He was usually among the league leaders in steals per game, and when you mix that ability with Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman, well then it's no wonder why they were such a nightmare on defense. Derek Fisher of the 2000s Lakers. Every single one of Kobe's 5 championship teams had Derek Fisher as a teammate. Oftentimes, Robert Horry is recognized as the clutch shooting role player during their championship runs, but I would argue that Fisher was just as valuable, if not more so. This 6'1" point guard was arguably the best spot-up three-point shooter on the entire team, which was even more valuable for this specific group, considering how Shaq was often looking to kick the ball out to his shooters after the defense collapsed. In those situations, none were more dependable than Fisher, especially in the 2001 playoffs, where the Lakers famously steamrolled their way to the championship with a 15-1 record. Sure, Kobe and Shaq dominated, but over those playoffs, Fisher was the team's 3rd leading scorer, averaging 13.4 points. And not only did he lead the team in three-point attempts, but he hit a ridiculous 51.5% of his three-point shots. In the years afterwards, Fisher continued to prove that he was one of the most clutch role-playing shooters in the league, hitting numerous iconic shots in the postseason. Bruce Bowen of the 2000 Spurs. He's another incredibly valuable 3-and-D player who was the Spurs' starting small forward in 7 out of his 8 seasons in San Antonio. Bowen absolutely loved the corner 3, and under the coaching of Greg Popovich, he had plenty of opportunities. He was usually shooting around 40% from three-point range, but at his peak in 2003, he shot a league-best 44.1% over the course of the season. Even more valuable than his three-point shooting was his perimeter defense. Even though Tim Duncan is known as one of the greatest defensive players of all time, you could make the argument that he wasn't the best defender on his own team during his prime, as Bowen finished as the runner-up for the Defensive Player of the Year in 3 straight seasons, from 2005 to 2007. In total, he made 8 All-Defense teams, and I kinda think he isn't recognized for it because he often received the title of a dirty player from the basketball community. And I don't think anyone believes that more than Vince Carter, who was about ready to destroy Bowen after the third time he stepped under his foot and rolled Carter's ankle. Regardless on your opinions of Bowen's character, the reality is he was a pivotal aspect in 3 of their title runs in San Antonio. Andre Iguodala of the 2010s Warriors. Back in the early years before Golden State, Iggy was seen as a star who could play above the rim and was averaging as high as 20 points per game in 2008. During his time in Golden State, he was in his early to mid-30s, and he served the team as their 6th man. Over time, he started to own the role of a defensive specialist, and did a fantastic job of containing the best wings in the league, like LeBron James, for example. Famously, he even won the 2015 Finals MVP thanks to his defensive effort on LeBron. Eventually, he was even in the group of Warriors designated as the Death Lineup, operating as a key facilitator and defender. In total, he made 2 all-defense teams and was a part of all 4 of the Warriors' championship runs. So what do you guys think? Who's an underrated player from a Dynasty team, or just a championship team in general? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.